Good morning, this is Senate Judiciary, second session this morning. This session, we're taking up S-209 and Act relating to prohibiting unserialized firearms and unserialized firearm frames and receivers. And we have decided this morning to take juvenile offenses out of this bill and place it somewhere else. So we'll change the name of the bill to.
Right. Yes.
So it just has to do with unserialized firearms. So our first witness this morning is Mr. Henry Perro, who's been here before. He's owner of Perro's Guns and is a federally licensed firearm dealer. Mr. Perro, thank you for taking time with us this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
Is there a video feed for Mr. Perro? Or am I looking around?
Does he have his video on?
Mr. Perro, do you have your camera on?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm just trying to check the video here.
Okay. Not that you couldn't testify without it, but.
Well, I'm not a computer person, so I struggle a little bit here.
Lower left corner.
Lower left corner. There we go.
Oh, there we go.
That better?
Thank you.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to, whoop, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please, with any testimony you have on thoughts on 209 and particularly what it might or might not do in terms of federally licensed firearm dealers.
Yes. I have been approached many times over the years to work on and/or tune up personally manufactured firearms. And probably for the last 10 years, I have refused. We have a policy in place that we don't do it. Number one, I believe it gives a lot more liability issues to the licensed dealer, and we're under scrutiny as it is. Many of the laws here that you're proposing in 209, I believe are already covered by the federal government and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, especially about transfer of a unserialized, privately manufactured firearm. It needs a serial number anyway. We have taken the position that we don't work on them. Some of the other items in the bill I'd just like to bring up is that putting our FFL number on a firearm, the front and the rear of our federal license, I believe would somehow put us maybe as the manufacturer. I'm not sure. That's going to be a really slippery slope, if you will. When we stamp our federal firearms license number on a firearm, I believe that would put us into the category of a lot more liability. It now becomes our firearm. And then to get it out of the books, we have to do a background check, which when we work on guns, they don't go into we have two sets of bound books. One of them is for the sale of a firearm, completely different than a gunsmithing record book. Now, under current federal law, somebody brings a PMF to us to work on and/or serial number, it would go in our gunsmithing book because the firearm is not for sale. So under federal law, we do the work, that person picks it up. We have to verify their identity with a Vermont photo driver's license when the firearm comes in. And when we return the firearm, it says, is this the same person that dropped it off? And of course, it comes up with name, date of birth. Is this who you're handing the firearm to? And we click yes or no. Obviously, it's going to be a yes if it is. then under federal law, we can hand that firearm back to them. There is no paperwork involved because it's their firearm. So there's a little hiccup here in the way that this bill is written. Even when they're denied, if we were to put it in our sale book and they're denied, the Vermont State Police would have to do a letter to the FFL holder saying, we are taking, on letterhead, we are taking this firearm from Perro's Gun Shop and it now becomes our property. And it has to be signed by a lieutenant or above. And then that has to go into our federal bookkeeping system. We can't just deliver or hand a firearm to anybody. And that includes a police department. I do the law enforcement sales all over New England. I'm very familiar. Can't hand anybody a gun.
May I ask a question, because you just touched on something that I was concerned about. If a person comes in and if you were doing it, you said you don't want to do it, you don't do it. But if you were doing it and putting a serial number on a firearm and the person fails the background check, what do you do then? What would a licensed firearm have to do?
Well, under S209, you're saying I have to deliver it to the Vermont State Police, which could be done as long as the state police give me a letter on letterhead describing the firearm and the serial number and saying that they're taking possession of it. Because 10 years down the road, when I'm audited and I have this line that says turned over to the state police, I need documentation to back up that's what happened.
Thank you.
So the bottom line is that I don't believe we're going to find FFLs that are willing to do this. With the increased liability, the liability on the sale of firearms as it is, I certainly won't be doing it. When it comes to the engraving of metal, that's one thing, but there's a whole different process when it's a polymer frame. I'm not even familiar with how that would work, but it's nothing I would ever get involved in. It's a little more above my pay grade to figure out how you put metal into a 3D printer. I don't know anything about it. So the bottom line is, it's just, once again, this law has a potential of turning law-abiding citizens who have manufactured a personal firearm under federal law and turn them into the criminal instead of the people who are actually using them.
Yes, Senator Morris.
Thank you. So, Henry, if I heard you right, and if you did put serial numbers on firearms, and I know you don't, did you say earlier that when they bring the gun in, it's their gun, they hand it to you, you put it in your book under being worked on, and you ask for a Vermont driver's license? And then if you were to stamp it, did you say your only requirement would be to simply just identify the person whom you're giving the gun back to, or I was confused there?
Yes. So under current federal law, somebody brings in a firearm to have a scope mounted, something as simple as that. They have to produce positive identification, which 99% of the time is a Vermont photo driver's license. We create them as the customer. We do the work order saying they need a scope mounted. We call them up when it's finished. A couple days later, that person comes in and produces a Vermont photo driver's license. We retrieve the firearm, and through our computer, we have a pretty complex computer system that it says, is John Smith, date of birth, the person you are handing this gun back to. So we have to positively identify it's the same person. So they can't send their brother in, they can't send their wife in. We have to hand it back to them.
And that's fine, I understand that part, Henry, but I wanted you to be more specific on if you affixed a serial number to that gun, is it the same process or is there a 3-day waiting period?
I would have to say, because it's a repair type situation on a privately owned firearm, I believe that would be a gunsmithing issue. Now, I know that engravers that do trophies and plates and all that, they currently do firearms. They engrave privately owned firearms, but they can't hold it overnight. And they hand it back to that person. The person has to wait or pick it up within that same day. So there's no background check. They don't have the process to do a background check.
Okay, and final question that I can think of right now anyways. Do you have a list of serial numbers or would you have to call to get a serial number to affix it to the firearm if you did do this, Henry?
Well, no, under 209, I already have my federal license, the first 3 and the last 5, and then I would assign a random number. So if you're asking, do we call the ATF and say, can you generate a serial number? Then the answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
I believe that the bill can make clear that you're not the manufacturer. I think that is not our intent to make the federally licensed firearm person a manufacturer of the firearm, since probably it was done with a 3D printer. I do want to mention that part of the reason that this bill is here, at least in my district down in Bennington, particularly Bennington, Pownell, and parts of Rutland, which is not my district, and down into western Massachusetts, there's been a huge increase in the number of unserialized firearms, mainly made with printers. Because I think the federally licensed firearm dealers are doing a heck of a job of curtailing straw purchases. Where and we know that a number of drug dealers from Massachusetts has come to Vermont to try to trade guns for drugs. And when the individuals have gone to some of the drug dealers in my area, when the drug dealers have gone to some of the federally licensed firearm dealers in my area, they've been turned away. And they've been told, no, we will not sell you the firearm. So part of the reason that we're seeing the increase, I think, is because of the good job you're doing. So I did want to mention that.
Oh, thank you. You had touched on one of the big issues is it's the drug dealers coming in wanting to trade. I don't think anybody would oppose stiffer penalties for crimes committed with unserialized firearms. I don't think anybody would oppose that. I don't think anybody would oppose stiffer penalties, felonies being committed with a firearm. It's let's go after this root of the problem. And the law-abiding citizen that has built a personal firearm since 1968 shouldn't be punished in any way. That's my personal opinion. It's just the bottom line is I believe what's going to happen is I don't know the numbers of personally manufactured firearms in Vermont that are in legal hands is probably 100-fold over illegal. And what we still have people come in almost on a daily basis that are not familiar with the magazine ban that occurred 4 or 5 years ago, or the private party transfer law, and recently the 72-hour hold. So now we have another law that who's going to enforce it, who's going to police it, if you will. And once again, I feel that the burden is being put on the law-abiding citizen and the federally licensed dealers and not so much on the criminal aspect. So if somebody is using this in the commission of a felony, then I would have to say, go after them, put pressure, find out who is manufacturing these firearms. And there's also a federal law saying you cannot manufacture firearms for resale without a manufacturing license. So now we have the meat of the federal government going after these people manufacturing instead of the Vermont State Police. So I think that would be a much better rule.
Senator Baruth has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Perro. I'm wondering, when you separate out law-abiding versus non-law abiding, is it your personal feeling that people have a right to print guns from a 3D printer in their home as long as they're not committing a crime with them?
Yes, under federal law, it is permissible for personal use. Now, when you cross that line, that's when you become subject to federal law. Someone who is printing and or manufacturing for commercial use and or the drug trade, that's a whole separate issue. That's something the ATF should go after. Absolutely.
I'm just wondering then, so there was no limit in your mind in terms of how many guns somebody could legally print in their house?
So for personal use, I believe there is not a limit.
So if they wanted to print 100 guns or 200 guns, that would be their right, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think it's my opinion. It's under federal law. Yes, they can, as far as I know.
Okay, I'm just trying to get at what seems to be a change in technology, which allows an individual to, not in all cases, not even most cases, but in some cases, someone could, in effect, become a manufacturing facility in their home. And I think personally, I think it's in the state's interest to regulate that. This bill seems like a very light touch, and that is, you need to get a serial number. We're not saying we're going to criminalize producing a gun. We're just saying you need to get a serial number and you need to go through a background check, because I think it's in all of our interests to make sure that we don't have people outside the background check system creating potentially unlimited number of guns without serial numbers. So I take your point about the logistics of getting serial numbers on the guns, and we're working on those issues. But in terms of the basics, I think the 3D printer is really the heart of this, and then the internet as a means for delivering kits that can be turned into guns without serial numbers. So it's not my intention at all to harm the practice of law-abiding gun owners, but I think there is, because of the different technologies involved, there's an expanding hole in the background check system that we're trying to fix.
And I can understand what you're saying. The manufacture of firearms is regulated by a federal agency. They have set up federal laws. They have much more power, much more investigative tools. If somebody is manufacturing 100 guns in their home and they're selling them, I believe the ATF should be involved, and the ATF should go in and make an example out of it. Absolutely. I'm saying if a guy is or a person is manufacturing personal firearms for his own use, right now under federal law, that is permissible.
Understood, and we're contemplating a law that would change it in Vermont. But thank you for your testimony.
Okay, well, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Carroll? Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony, and be well and enjoy the day.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. Eric, do you want to?
Yep.
You got it. Well, I don't know that we'll get through the whole draft, but do you think we need to make clear that whoever the federally licensed, if we pass this bill,
I don't think so.
that it's not,
That they don't become the manufacturer.
they don't become a
Yeah,
manufacturer, because that's not our intent.
that makes sense to me.
We have a new draft,
Yes,
it's called weapons.
yes, that'll be the new time. Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel here to talk with the committee about, version 2.1 of a possible committee amendment to S209, as Senator Sears mentioned, lines 4 and 5 that are not highlighted right now on page 1, since you made the decision earlier this morning to add the, Big 12 issue to a different bill. You probably want to change the title here. So there'll be a new title section as well that strikes the reference to juvenile offenses in the next version.
Yeah.
Similarly, not really a huge deal, but you may recall, see the highlighted changes to the short title on page 1. That was done. That short title was moved to the new chapter because it didn't make sense for the whole act to be called the Vermont Ghost Guns Act when it included the juvenile Big 12 piece.
But now it's,
Exactly. But it really doesn't matter one way or the other, however you want it. You can
Yeah.
keep it in the chapter or, so, you know, I've highlighted a few things, but it may be that the committee has other issues you want to talk about. So, we can go through the highlights first if you want. And
let's go through the highlights and then, whatever time we have to give you some direction for next week.
Sounds good. So the first one is really just a placeholder. You'll see what it means when we get to the following page. But on page 3, you'll see there's a proposed possible new definition of violent crime added. And that's because if you turn the page again to page 5, is the subdivision 2, lines 10 to 13. Remember, this is the whole concept that and I think you discussed it a little bit this morning, of in addition to the prohibition on unserialized firearms, you also have an enhanced penalty for someone who uses or possesses or carries an unserialized firearm while they're committing some crime. Remember that issue had been discussed by the committee as well, but there have been a couple of outstanding questions about that, and that's why you see different terminology highlighted.
But I think we decided to go with use.
Yes, exactly. That was also
Not
done this
use,
morning.
Uses.
Yes,
Eric,
so line
Can't even
10.
pronounce a four-letter word, it's in trouble today.
is there any knowingly issue there?
Not if you use the word uses, then no, because uses incorporates.
Well, I mean,
If you were possessing, yes, there might have been an issue.
But I mean, knowingly is using an unserialized firearm.
Say it again, sorry.
In other words, the person could know that they are using a firearm, but they might argue that they didn't know it was unserialized.
Oh, I see what you mean. No, I think the knowingly transposes to
Okay.
cover that as well. And you also have an intent. It's separate from the issue you're raising, but because it's involving the commission of an underlying crime, that has its own intent requirement as well. So you'd have to be intentionally committing whatever illegal conduct there was, plus intentionally having an unserialized.
Great.
It does, we hadn't got to the second, you'll see, so I think, as you mentioned, Senator Sears, you decided this morning that you're gonna use the term uses, correct? Because they're gonna be consistent across the different pieces of legislation you're considering. So that brings up the second question, which is, to what do you want this new crime to apply?
Any felony, I do. I don't know where the committee's at, but
Okay. If it helps to, you talked about violent crime, so you have in your,
no, because I want to include drug crimes. Personally, I mean, it's up to the committee, but my preference would be felony drug. Make sure that felony drug crimes are included. And if I say not violent, then I'm not including.
that particular definition of violent crime, that's why I on the page before that reference, that's the existing violent crime definition in the Vermont law that prohibits possession of a firearm by a person who's been convicted of a violent crime. So in your, been passed out so that you have the definition. It does, we worked on that, I think it was 2015, Senator Sears, and to address
Okay.
exactly that issue, and it does include drug trafficking. Let's see,
So this is the punishment for a felony.
For the unserialized possession.
Well, I'm just wondering, 5 years or 5,000, isn't that the standard felony punishment?
Well, it's 2 years that crosses into that's the lowest possible, but that 5 years happens to be, the same. I base that on the fact that, remember the crime we were discussing this morning, use of a dangerous weapon while committing carrying a dangerous weapon while committing a felony, that has a 5-year felony currently, so that
Right.
tracks that.
So if they use an unserialized firearm while committing a felony,
Correct,
they're potentially on the hook for 10 years. Is that,
potentially,
Yeah.
yep, could continue to be charged with both, yep.
okay.
But you're saying that I'm fine, if I wanna include drug trafficking crimes, we can use violent crime.
That does include, yep, as currently existing in, the possession of firearm statute, yes, includes, selling, dispensing, trafficking drugs. Yep, that's specifically included, because you're right, that isn't usually, the way that violent crime is defined is a listed crime with some exceptions, and then it adds a few other things, and drug selling, trafficking is one of them.
So because the example that Senator Vohosky gave, because we're now using the term uses the gun in commission of a felon, so 13 or 14-year-old who comes out of the woods and tosses a brick through a $2,500 window while he's squirrel hunting, that covers him now, right? They're not, because he didn't use the gun.
Serialized.
No, I'm serialized gun. Just say
Standard gun.
standard gun, yeah. Does that apply in this situation, is my question?
That's current law.
Yeah, this only applies to unserialized.
Unserialized, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair, did I understand?
If he's using the 3D printer gun, and he does that, yes.
Unserialized. That's the key.
Were you indicating that you were changing from any felony to violent crime?
Yeah.
Because I like violent crime better than any.
Yeah, no, I wanted to include drug trafficking, and
Yeah.
Eric explained that it does,
Yeah,
using the term violence, so. I forget, we need to go back and someday, maybe I won't be here, someday the committee should go back and look at what is a violent crime and how we've defined it.
Yeah,
Because really, I forgot we did that. And now we're going to define it as part of the bail statute. Okay, the next change, big change is over here.
well,
The-
page 6.
right. So this is the process that I think the committee was just discussing this morning, about the ability of a, federal firearms dealer to serialize a firearm. Remember, this is a may, not a requirement that it be done, it's a may, so it's permissive. It may print a serial number on an unserialized component of a firearm. And there was some discussion about what would happen, you brought it up, Senator Sears, this morning, about what would happen if the person fails a background check before it's returned to the person. I think the committee settled on language that if that were the case, the licensee would deliver it to a law enforcement agency for disposition. You may want to add here, I heard the idea being discussed that you could say that the law enforcement agency shall provide a receipt with the firearm serial number on it. And remember the issue of.
Letterhead, he was very specific.
Oh, right.
It seemed as though that was a federal requirement.
He needs something for his records to show that he
Yeah,
transferred the firearms.
Right. Yeah, and actually the rest of the bill all has to do with raise the age. Yes, pretty much.
So I think,
And that's getting put in S58 now, yeah?
yes, so we're taking that out. This will just be unserialized firearms.
Right,
Raise the age, if it goes in anywhere, it will be in S58. The Big 12 will be in S58. The rentals will be in S58. The bail bill will have similar language regarding using a firearm. So I think the goal of the committee was to be consistent through all three bills.
right.
So, only thing I think we still need is something to make clear that the federally licensed firearm dealer is not the manufacturer. Am I missing anything else?
Or not a manufacturer.
Well, I think
So, but
in
it
some
will be-
instances, they could be
Right.
a manufacturer, because some FFLs do also do gunsmithing
Yeah,
and
just for the
manufacturing.
Purpose
They're-
of serialization.
Yes, like if all they're doing is serializing, they don't become the manufacturer of that weapon.
I think he's concerned about the liability,
Mhm.
and I would be too if I were a federally licensed firearm dealer. The liability of being seen as the manufacturer, as we've seen in Connecticut, where they did successfully reach a $70-odd million settlement with the manufacturer of the firearms used in Sandy Hook. But anything else that you would like to see in or out of the bill? For lack of a better term, the various sports persons groups and others have said they support a stronger penalty, but that's it.
Well, and I think if we're following the data, we know that, as you pointed out, the chance of being caught seems to diminish engagement in crime, but stricter penalties don't. So I certainly don't see that as a viable path towards taking care of the issue you're trying to take care of. Whereas by creating this, it sort of creates that worried about getting caught aspect.
When do we have H209 scheduled again? Ben?
It will be Wednesday.
S209.
If S209 will be Wednesday, I have about 45 minutes.
Should be plenty of time.
I hope so.
I can shorten it if needed, yeah.
Well, I'd leave 45 minutes in case there's more discussion. Because is there any other change that the committee would like to see in the bill? It's okay to oppose it too, by the way.
Oh, no doubt.
That's not a problem. I've had that feeling for a couple of days now, Senator. But are there any other changes that the committee would like to see in the bill? All right, Eric, so I guess we'll see you Wednesday and try to put together something to make clear that the FFL is not the manufacturer. All they're doing is the serialization.
Yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
And then I would go back and go back to the short title
Right,
that you crossed out.
yeah. And then, as you said, the raise the age stuff, we're gonna be on the next draft of,
S58.
right,
And
right,
that would be the amendments that we talked about today.
right, the benchmarks.
Yeah.
Benchmarks, for justice oversight.
Well, that's raise the age. I'm talking about the Big 12. That amendment would be on 58 as well.
Right. Yeah, right, exactly.
The Big 12 benchmarks, I'm gonna meet with the commissioner. I think we got the commissioner scheduled Wednesday in here.
Yep, so that will be
And
right
I'm meeting
after.
with him on Tuesday to try to see what we can do.
Right.
If you wanna join me or what.
Sounds good.
It's during caucus time. I know you won't want this caucus.
I'm gonna leave the 5th.
All right.